Again, my name is Jeff Cottle. I'm one of the senior attorneys at Anderson Business Advisors. I come from a background of litigation. And it's very funny because my wife, who is actually also an attorney, we met in law school. And we realized very early on in my career as a litigator that both I was very good at it. I was doing very well. I had experience early in my career going toe to toe against, founding partners of other big law firms, and me, being very early in my career. This was several years ago, and me filing the motions and drafting all of this stuff going up against them. We realized both that I was good at it, but that it was not the lifestyle that we wanted to raise our children around. And when I talk about this, I don't mean that all attorneys are inherently evil. Like, no, of course not. You know attorneys, I know attorneys. The vast majority of them are outstanding. They're very pleasant to interact with and usually upstanding members of their communities. But more just that the way that litigation works and the way that liability works and the way that the profession, the legal profession as a whole, operates now is very different than what we think. I'll tell you a couple of my war stories as a litigator here in a second, but we realized that we would do more good in the world, we'd be doing better in the world if I spent my time helping people avoid the courtroom, helping people avoid liability, protect their assets, protect their wealth, protect the impact that they have worked so hard to build so it does not fall prey to some ambulance chasing attorney or some crash out on social media or anything like that. So instead, that's why we're here with Anderson now. And so in litigation, to work at Anderson, I do have to have experience with tax and with real estate law, and yes, with small business. I did all of those things. I also did healthcare a lot too during my time as a litigator, and I leverage that every day here at Anderson. My wife and I are also investors, and that's a big part of why we do this here too, is because we've been where you are. No matter where you are in your investment journey, whether you're just getting started, whether you've already built up a sizable portfolio or anything in between, these are things that we have seen, not just as an attorney, but as investors ourselves. And so I'll talk with you tonight about some of those primary things that we see. The number one mistake, I'll tell you in a second what that is. But also here at Anderson Business Advisors, we come from a very similar area to myself personally. Our founders are real estate investors and business owners and traders. We have people of all sorts of experience here at the firm, and we bring that experience and leverage that here. So we're not talking just in theory. We're saying, hey, we have this experience as investors. We have this experience in the courtroom, right? We've seen the way these things operate, and we want to pass this along to you. And we think of ourselves, while we are attorneys and while we are a law firm, we think of ourselves much more as an education company. And we say, hey, we want to work with you to help you understand what it is that you need to do to maximize your tax planning, to protect your loved ones from liability, to help your impact grow across multiple generations, and to help build that wealth and protect it in the future. And yes, we have all of that in-house. We have an estate planning team. Yes, we absolutely have a tax planning team in-house. We didn't always, but we got a lot of feedback from clients saying it was very difficult for them to sort of be the middle person, right? Trying to communicate our strategies to their CPAs. So we brought it in-house. We've got a tax team in-house as well. We've got CPAs, tax advisors, tax planners, all here in-house. And we leverage all of that. And we make updates as we go to bring it all to you. So thank you again for joining us. So let's talk about then more specifically, what are these strategies that I've alluded to? How do we actually protect your wealth and your impact? How do we make sure then that you're not subject to some kind of crazy liability here? So the first thing we do, and the number one mistake that I see, is when investors start doing things in their personal name. I get people asking me all the time, Jeff, what's your first tip and your first strategy for somebody who's a new investor or somebody who's still growing? And I say my number one piece of advice is do not invest in your personal name. Because if you invest in your personal name, that information is out there and you're a target. Let me tell you what I mean. Let me illustrate this with a story. Back when I was a litigator, so this was before my time at Anderson. Back when I was a litigator, I had a client who was a small business owner and a successful one. It was a small business number of employees wise, but he was very successful, brought in a lot of money. And I really cannot tell you much about it because of confidentiality reasons and because he was a celebrity in his industry. He wasn't like a big time influencer or anything like that. No Mr. Beast or anything like that, but he was well known within his industry and had a very large online profile for those who engaged in similar activities as he did. And he also had a bunch of other assets and bank accounts. He did all of this in his own name. And this was problematic because an attorney caught wind of him and had an opportunity to sue. And when he searched up this client of mine online, bang, wiped out everything within a matter of a couple weeks. Using what's called, for you legal nerds out there, using what's called a preliminary injunction, which is when you make a motion before the court to do something without a full trial. Using a preliminary injunction, they grabbed his bank accounts and they put a huge courtroom lien called a lis pendens on a very large piece of real estate that he had. Froze up everything. This was before I started working with him. I came later in the middle of the lawsuit. I came on. But his life was completely altered in a matter of a few moments in that case. And what's wild is if he had just taken a couple of simple steps, if he had just, for example, as you can see here on the screen, I'll start drawing out here. If he had just used a business entity, if he had just used, say, an LLC, if he just used an LLC to own his piece of real estate, or we'll talk about statutory trusts and where they come in here in a minute. If he had just done that, he would have still been able to live his life and the impact would have been just minuscule of this lawsuit. If he had done his work, if he had done his job, I told you he was a celebrity within his industry. If he had done that in an LLC, again, the impact in his life would have been so minimal. But instead, everything was upended. And even if he wanted to, here's what's wild is like, even if he wanted to just pay off the other attorney and move on, he didn't. But even if he had, he couldn't because they prevented him from doing so by putting this lien on his property. If he wanted to, say, refinance to get the cash out or anything like that. And so it was so wild that they not only shut everything down for him, but then they forced him to continue through this awful lawsuit process because of the way they set this up. And again, if he had just owned his property, not in his personal name, if he had used a proper LLC structure, let's say if he had used, and as you can see here, if he had used a Wyoming LLC and then had owned the property in a local LLC up here, we would be talking about a completely different story. And the reason that this matters, is because of this separation up here. LLC specifically stands for Limited Liability Company. And what that means is that the LLC is separate from you as an investor. And so if there is liability related to this LLC, that's different from you. So I'll give you a quick example here. Let's say this is not the case, but let's say hypothetically, my wife and I own 6 properties, and they're all in our personal names. If a plaintiff's attorney catches wind of us and they look up Jeff Cottle on the county records in the state where we live and invest, and they see those properties, just like this attorney for my client, it doesn't matter what the merits of the case are. That lawsuit is coming. Why? Because it looks like I have money. And attorneys, that's what they're looking for now, is they're looking for the next payday. And so that lawsuit is going to come if I have assets in my personal name or if my name is searchable. However, if my wife and I instead were to use LLCs to own our properties, suddenly our names are not on the county records. And even more importantly, if somebody were to have a slip and fall on one of our properties, the owner of the property is the one who comes up in the lawsuit. If the owner is an LLC, it's not us. And so the LLC is sued, and my wife and I, we are not sued. We are not liable for what happens in that LLC. Of course, that's a little simplistic, but that's the baseline of an LLC. It not only provides protection, we call it anonymity. Not only provides protection because your name is not online, but it also provides protection because there's separate liability actually in court. So I saw a couple of questions come in, but I wanted to get that first bit out of the way right now, is that investing in your personal name is the number one mistake that I see from real estate investors. And if that's you, if you've invested in your personal name, I want to be clear, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're some kind of, that all hope is lost and everything is gone. Like, no, we can remedy this and we can fix it, but we have to take action quickly. So we make sure we don't turn into a situation where we suddenly have liability coming your way, because if that does, then we run into trouble. If we have liability coming your way and we try to make a change after the fact. So I saw a few questions come in here, and I'll address them quickly. So I saw somebody ask about, well, where does a living trust or a revocable living trust fit into this? That's a great question. So trusts are vital for a few reasons. Oh, but that is black ink, and that doesn't show up very well, so I'll do white up here. Trusts are vital for several reasons. You can see here, sort of on the slide on the screen, that trusts make a difference here. And a living trust, it's both things are true. That the living trust is not used for anonymity or for asset protection. And it's also true that it's hard for me to describe how important that document is for its other uses in protecting your children or your family members or your friends or whoever it is that you have as your heirs. The living trust might be the single most important document that we have. And so then the living trust, how that usually works, to answer the question that came in here, how that usually works is that the living trust then owns your LLCs. So you might have an LLC structure that looks like this. I'll erase here. But you might have an LLC structure that looks like this. And I saw another question about multiple LLCs. So you might have an LLC structure that looks like this, where we have a local LLC. And each of those local LLCs, whether they are in California or New York, or whether they're in Texas or whatever other state we're investing in, those local LLCs own actual real estate. Then they in turn are owned by this Wyoming LLC down here. And then the Wyoming LLC is owned by your living trust. So we might have that down here, LT for living trust. And that's perfect. And the reason we do that is so that we get protection in the event of a lawsuit from a state like Wyoming. I'll explain here because I saw somebody else mention California. The California Secretary of State website lists owners of individual California LLCs. And my short response to that is, you're correct. It's a good observation. We know all about that in all 50 states. In fact, we have an incredibly detailed list that our team tracks regularly. It's updated once a week, of the different requirements for filing in individual states, what's listed publicly, what's not. We have all of that searchable. And I say that to say that we keep track of all of these things for all of our clients so that you don't have to. And if we have to make updates for you, then so be it. We're happy to. And go ahead, ask our head deeds attorney about Florida. Florida's been making some crazy changes recently, and we've been keeping up with it, but it's been a lot of work. So I say that then to say that somebody mentioned California. So what happens in California then is, and there are a lot of other states like this, where we say, okay, if our local LLC, so let's say this is a California LLC then. It's not going to be, and I'll mention a specific strategy for California. Watch out for statutory trusts here in just a minute. But let's say we've got a California LLC just for this hypothetical, right? That LLC's information is listed on the Secretary of State website in California. And like, let's be real, a California LLC is better than nothing. But California doesn't have, I know it's not surprising, but California doesn't have that great of protection for LLCs compared to other states. That is where this comes in. We have the parent company in Wyoming for several reasons. In California, we can talk about specifically two of them. The Wyoming parent company allows you to drag lawsuits into Wyoming if we set it up properly. And that's a big if. If we set it up properly, allows you to drag lawsuits out of California or out of any other state, right, and into Wyoming, where Wyoming has excellent protection. Kind of one of the big three for asset protection is Wyoming, Delaware, and Nevada are the big three. Wyoming for our real estate investors will be most common. So it allows us to drag lawsuits into Wyoming if we structure it properly. But the second thing that happens, very importantly, is that that information, I believe it's PS over here that I'm seeing on my screen, the PS mentioned, that information that's publicly searchable. Well, the information that's listed on the California Secretary of State website, it lists the owner of the LLC, of the California LLC. If the owner of a California LLC is a human, then yes, that gets listed publicly, and we're not super anonymous there. But what happens if the owner of that California LLC is a Wyoming LLC? Then that Wyoming LLC is what is listed on the California Secretary of State website rather than your individual name. In that case, then, that Wyoming LLC is what is listed, so we remain anonymous. So what happens then is if somebody has a slip and fall on a piece of real estate, again, in California, another state that's notorious for having this information public is Texas. So let's say we have a slip and fall on a piece of Texas real estate. Well, then if our injured individual, our plaintiff, goes to a local attorney, the first thing they're going to do is search who owns this piece of property. And in this case, the owner of that piece of property would be your Texas LLC, or again, California or wherever else where we're not anonymous, which is most of the states. So then they go to the Texas Secretary of State website. And in that Texas Secretary of State website, what do they see? Well, they see that the owner of the Texas LLC is your Wyoming LLC. We're looking really sharp so far, and we have a very disappointed personal injury attorney. And that's great. That's what we want. And most personal injury attorneys at this stage, they would give up because they can't see the money, they cannot see the assets, they cannot see the reason for them to continue. But if they decide to continue, if they decide to then look up on that Wyoming Secretary of State website just for fun, let's say they want to see like, okay, well then who owns that Wyoming LLC? They look it up on the Wyoming LLC, and what do they see? Or the Wyoming Secretary of State website, pardon? And what do they see? They see nothing because Wyoming is anonymous. Wyoming does not list ownership publicly. And it's funny because Wyoming does not list ownership publicly because they don't want to. It's because they don't have that information. So Wyoming does not list ownership of LLCs because they don't collect it. They don't ask for it. So even if they were to list this information publicly, or even if they were to be asked to, Wyoming could not turn it over. They don't have it. They don't have it. They're not capable of giving it. And that's great. That's what we want. And we're not going to volunteer that information with them. Certainly not. So these are all things that we keep in mind when we're setting up a structure for your protection. I saw a couple of other questions here that get a little bit into the weeds. I don't want to get too I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, so I'll just give a couple of other quick overarching principles to grab at PS's questions here. So I'm going to give a couple of quick overarching principles. So one is this. PS has brought up a couple of specific requirements for LLCs in given states. Our sort of thought about that, without again getting too far into the weeds, is we've got all that covered. We have a physical building in Wyoming that you can lease from us, so you have a physical presence there, and you can use our registered agent address, and you can use our business address, and so that way you do have a physical presence in Wyoming, and we'll provide that lease for you, so you can not just claim but be true in the fact that you have physical presence in the state of Wyoming for that Wyoming LLC. And that's also a big part of why we do child companies, is because that Wyoming LLC, its only physical presence is in Wyoming. These child companies, sure, they're in California, they're in Montana, they're in Idaho or Kansas or whatever other state it might be, and that's fine. They own property there. The parent company is the one we're really worried about because that's where the protection comes in. I also saw a quick question, and then I'll grab a couple of the others here. I also saw a quick question about something that can be subpoenaed. You're right. If a court or a judge requires that we disclose certain information, and it's a valid subpoena, it's a valid request from a judge, we're not going to hide it. But at that rate, then the plaintiff's attorneys have something else to worry about. I'll tell you a quick story about that, and I'll grab a couple of these other questions because being anonymous is only part of the equation. It's a vital part. It's very important, but it's only part of it. Wyoming LLCs also provide protection in the courtroom. Even if somebody knows that you own a Wyoming LLC, even if I name a Wyoming LLC, my name is Jeff, please sue me, comma, LLC. Wyoming still gives me all of the protection in the world. Side note, I've had a colleague of mine threaten to file an LLC of his under that name. My name is Jeff, please sue me, comma, LLC. But the reason I bring that up is Wyoming gives protections in court. If for whatever reason the anonymity is no longer there, if it's pierced, then we instead now have an LLC that provides protection. In fact, let me tell you, we had a client once who had a Wyoming LLC that so I'll draw this out up here. So we had a client once that had his Wyoming LLC, and a creditor had come along. I'll draw the creditor over here. A creditor had come along and had gotten a judgment. I'll write that in red. Bad. Gotten a judgment against this Wyoming, against our client. I'll draw the client here. So we'll draw a picture of the judgment right here. Boo. And it was a somewhat bogus judgment. It was technically according to the law, but it was very much a gotcha kind of thing. And so it was very frustrating for our client, as you could imagine. So they filed the lawsuit very quickly, got the judgment against our client, and they were in what is called a debtor's exam, where our client went in and had to disclose, okay, here are all of my assets. Here are the things. Here are the things that we own and we have, and they disclosed that to them. And what's really interesting is our client then at this rate, he wasn't trying to hide anything. He bragged. He said, all right, take a look at this Wyoming LLC with this operating agreement and with this structure, proper structure in place. And this is our client telling us the story afterwards, talking to Clint Coons, one of our founding partners. Our client says, in this debtor's exam, the opposing attorneys, when they saw my structure and saw my documents in place, they turned off the camera and left the room. And then they came back for a settlement offer for less than a quarter of what the judgment was for. Our client, of course, turned down the settlement offer, said, no, you can't take anything from me. So I'm not going to tell this to you. I'm not going to give this up that easily. They eventually reached a settlement agreement for pennies on the dollar because our client just wanted to be done with the lawsuit. But that's the value of these structures, is because other attorneys know that they cannot get them in court, even if you're not anonymous anymore. So yes, information can be procured through court order, but that doesn't actually help the plaintiff's attorneys. Great questions, though. Great questions. I saw a couple of others. I'll go quickly through them. So I saw another individual ask, like, okay, so why one LLC per property? Says they've heard of Clint Coons talking about that and asking, well, it can get expensive. And I'll disagree slightly with that, just by way of example. In Wyoming LLC, the renewal fees are about $63.75, if I'm not mistaken, per year. That's not per month, that's per year for the renewal fees. That's it. You'll have a registered agent cost too, whoever you use as your registered agent. Our registered agent services are $195 per year. So we're talking about $250 to have that LLC in place per year. It's a lot less expensive than insurance, though you should have both to a certain degree. So with that protection, though, in place, just getting more importantly, the reason we have one LLC per property is because we want the properties to be protected from each other. If we just have a singular LLC up here, I'll draw it out in orange for an at-risk asset. If we just have a singular LLC up here, and we have 5 properties that are owned by this LLC, I'll just draw 3, but we'll say 5 or 10 or however many. What happens is if we have liability on one property, all of the others are impacted because they have the same owner. You might not be impacted because you don't own the properties, the LLC does. But your entire portfolio can still be up in smoke with one event. Versus if we have one LLC per property, what we have then instead is we have a containment field where the liability is blocked off. If something happens on one property, all of the others are not automatically implicated. And this happened with a client of ours. This happened with a client of ours who they had 17 properties. And they had a child get in a car accident while they were at college. Tragically, it ended up killing somebody else. And because that our clients' names were all listed on title of the vehicle that their son was driving, then they actually ended up losing all 17 properties. It was heartbreaking for them. All 17 properties in the lawsuit related to that car accident. They weren't even involved in it. It was their son. And so because we don't want that to happen to you, we do recommend one LLC per property. Now, like everything that happens in the attorney world, there are exceptions for this, that, or the other. And I apologize for glancing off screen. I'm looking at a couple of the other questions. And so is there a time when we might say, it's okay to have more than one property per LLC? Like, yeah, if we're getting up into 50 or 100 plus properties, then sure, we might start dividing them up. But as you're getting started, yeah, one LLC per property is absolutely the recommendation here. I'm going to touch on a couple of the other questions here, and then I want to talk about our primary purpose this evening, which was those statutory trusts and where they come in. So a couple of the other questions, somebody had asked, hey, can you tell me how do we move a property into an LLC? Transferring it. We will usually use a deed. We recommend warranty deeds because that is what changes the county records so that your name is no longer on the county records and instead it is the name of the LLC. When you properly deed the property into the LLC using usually a warranty deed, that LLC remains on property. No, we usually don't have to worry about the due on sale clause. That's a totally understandable question we get. The due on sale clause only happens when we are changing to somebody else. If my wife and I own a property 50-50 and we move it into an LLC that we also own 50-50, we're good on the due on sale clause. Now, if my wife and I own a property 50-50 and then we move it into an LLC that the two of us own 33, and then another 33% for Kendall, then yes, we have a problem. Why? Because we've introduced somebody else now. Then we do have a problem with the due on sale clause. So if we keep the ownership the same and we don't have to worry about the due on sale clause, we can use a warranty deed to move the property into another LLC. We also have to use, somebody mentioned registered agents. We do have to use a registered agent for each LLC. Every LLC is just required to have a registered agent. It's kind of an archaic rule, but all 50 states have it. So our registered agent services we serve as registered agent in all 50 states. You can also have somebody else if you like. We're certainly not offended. If you can find another registered agent service, I'll tell you our services are about market rate for a registered agent. Plus, you get an actual law firm with attorneys serving as a registered agent rather than, your neighbor down the street doesn't know how to keep things private or anonymous. We had a client named their grandmother as their registered agent for one of their LLCs. And when the grandmother was served with papers, she said, "Oh, wow, Joey will be so pleased to see this. Thank you." And the person who served the paper said, "Wait, Joey?" She said, "Yes, Joey so and so," obviously not the real name, but then immediately gave away the anonymity that he was the owner of the property because she was so proud of him for being an investor. Immediately gave it away, and he was immediately named in the lawsuit as well. So you want to make sure you have somebody who is a professional serving as your registered agent. So let me make sure, I hope you'll forgive me for just grabbing this and making sure we got all the questions there. As we're still going then, there it is. Perfect. As we're still going, then, let me tell you a bit about a statutory trust and why that matters. The Wyoming Statutory Trust, thank you for your patience, is a special, specific entity. We did not invent it. The state of Wyoming invented it, but we did come up with its use in these situations. So, Wyoming Statutory Trust is very, very useful in states where we do not have a traditional setup. California is a great example, but it's certainly not the only state. California, their renewal fees for an LLC are even less expensive than in Wyoming. California only charges $25 per year to maintain an LLC in their state. Sounds amazing. There must be a catch. You're right, there is. California charges $800 per year at least in what's called a franchise tax. And because of this, people are hesitant to open a California LLC. Well, there's a California revenue ruling from the Franchise Tax Board that differentiates. And in California, they say that a business trust is not, in fact, subject to that California franchise tax. This is so important. This is so important because that business trust can save you $800 per year. Can you imagine if you have 4 or 5 properties, $800 per year per property? That's several $1,000s every year, and it just keeps growing and multiplying from there. However, this was an original idea from one of our founding partners, Clint Coons. We said, okay, what if we were to leverage then that Wyoming statutory trust and use that in California instead of an LLC? That has given us such a supreme advantage because that way you still have the protection. Like I said, you have outstanding protection in a Wyoming statutory trust from lawsuit. You are still anonymous. Nobody knows that you are the owner if you structure it properly. You have great protection in court. And now, on top of all of that, you're not paying California that $800 per year. And this is exactly the kind of customized advice that you get when you work with a professional. You might ask, is California the only state where we use statutory trust? The answer is no. It's one of the big ones, and a lot of people ask about California. But it's certainly not the only state where we want to try something else. Arkansas and Oregon are good examples because Arkansas and Oregon, and now Indiana is actually being added to this list as well. They are starting to crack down on LLCs that are being used anonymously. And so what we do instead is we say, okay, we'll switch things up a little bit. We might use a Wyoming statutory trust in that scenario as well, where we say, hey, we still want to be able to leverage the protection and the anonymity that comes from Wyoming, but we'll use this statutory trust instead to make sure that you still get all of the protection that you've worked so hard to build that wealth. And we want to make sure that continues to grow and that you don't have to worry about snooping attorneys coming around and looking for an excuse to try and get your stuff. So that's a big part of this here is we say, hey, if you have a customized situation that's unique or different, which everybody does. I've been at Anderson for several years now, interacted with thousands of clients. Not once have I seen any situation that it's the exact same or that merits the exact same entity structure or setup. And because of that, then, it's vital to work with a professional who understands your needs. And we'll talk about that opportunity that you will have to do that here in just a second. In fact, let's do that right now. Because as a thank you for joining us tonight, we want to invite you to come talk with myself or one of the other professional strategists and attorneys at Anderson Business Advisors, where you will talk one-on-one with somebody who will sit down with you and get to know your situation and your needs. They'll put together a structure that's customized to what you need in order to protect, in order to save on taxes. We haven't even touched on taxes yet. It's a huge part of what we do. And in order to grow. That's the biggest part of this, is we're not just protecting, but we're helping you to grow. And so we'll talk with you about all of that. What do you need for protection? What do you need for proper cash flow? What do you need to protect your children, your family members, your friends? What do you need to save on taxes? Your advisor will sit down and go over that with you for your situation. And then they will put together a specific structure for you. We call it a blueprint, but it'll be like these diagrams that we have back here. But it'll be specific for you with the states you are investing in, no matter how much or how little you have in assets. And we'll set that up for you right away. And so they will talk with you as well about what your investment will be. I've seen a couple of you ask about, what's the cost or how much do I have to invest with you? I get a little hesitant to give an exact dollar figure because everybody's situation is different. Some of you might need Wyoming statutory trusts, but others might not. Some of you might need a specific kind of provision in your living trust that costs a little more. Most of you will not. That's fine. But the investment that you need to make sure that you are protected and can continue to grow will vary depending on the person. And we're proud of that. We're proud of that. And I really feel bad sometimes because I see people go out and try to do this on their own and they get almost there, but then they mess it up and it makes me very sad. I was actually talking with a client earlier this week who she is very intelligent, very with it, is a general partner in a lot of syndication deals. So she's a very experienced investor. She went out and she put together her structure on her own and came back to me to talk with me a little bit about a couple of ideas and then left. And I was just talking with her this week and she described to me some of the things she's put together. She said, Jeff, how do I leverage the tax advantages with the way I've set up this corporation? And I had to tell her, it hurt my heart a little bit because she's been such a good friend, but it hurt my heart a little bit to tell her. I said, unfortunately, the answer is you don't. You have not set this up correctly. And you're actually not only losing the tax advantages, but you're actually actively adding taxes to what you're doing because of the way you've structured this. And so that's why we strongly recommend taking advantage of this. Come meet one-on-one with one of our advisors or myself personally. I'd love to talk with you so you can know what you need for your situation. I saw somebody ask out there, hey, what's a minimum net worth for somebody to start working with us? My answer is anybody. There's not really, I've worked with people all across the spectrum. I've got a couple of clients that are north of 100 million. I've also got plenty of clients that are south of 1 million, a lot south of that, and anything in between. If you have a future that you think is worth protecting, then you should come work with us. Now, I will add sort of a caveat to that. Now, let me be clear. My plans for somebody who is worth $100 million are not going to be the same as my plan for somebody who's fresh out of medical school, right? And is just barely buying their first home and has their first big job. Like, no, the structures will not be the same. The investment amount will not be the same. We will tailor our advice to what you need, right? And so if you need just one LLC in Wyoming for now, that's perfect. If you need 12 LLCs with 3 trusts and 2 corporations, that's awesome too. And anything in between. So I'll tell you, anybody who has a future that they want to protect, I'll point out my children here. It's worth your time to come have this conversation. Your structure won't be the same. Nobody's will be. And we'll adjust it based on what you need. I'm not going to recommend some crazy structure for somebody who's just getting started. But yes, anybody can come work with us. Great questions. So I want to go ahead and address a few of the other questions that have come in here. I hope you'll forgive me as I reach over here for my monitor to scroll down. Make sure I get them. So again, use that link, and I'll post the link in the chat here after we're finished. In fact, let me see if I can tilt this up, and I'll do that right now as we're still going. So let me go ahead here. We'll end here at about the half hour at 6:30 Pacific time, but I'm not going to cut anybody off mid-sentence, right? If you have more things you want to talk about, that's perfect. So I'm going to grab this link here, and I'm also going to post it in the chat. So I hope you'll forgive me while I go ahead and do
there,
it.
Jeff. Got you beat there, buddy. So it's in the chat.
Oh,
there.
you did. Ah, that's so perfect. Thank you. Let me pull my slides back up then, Kendall. Appreciate you. I'm going to do that because there are going to be a couple of other things I want to point out on them here. So Kendall, thanks for having my back, man.
Sure. Yeah, and curious. So a lot of the questions we get though, Jeff, by the way, is what happens when someone clicks on that link? Usually you have them fill out some information, right? Just so you can get a basis. And then what really happens once it's filled out? How does a consult work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So once that's filled out, we will reach out to you to talk with you and say, hey, let's get you scheduled with one of our expert strategists and somebody who's going to be good with your situation to move forward. So when we fill out that questionnaire, we do use that to pair you with somebody. Now, if you want to meet with me, I'd be happy to meet with you. And it's also true that we have experts who specialize in all sorts of different investing. Our strategists themselves are also investors. We have so many strategists who are either attorneys themselves or who are real estate brokers themselves or who are former we've got one attorney on staff who's even a former debt collector. So he was the bad guy. I was the bad guy too, let's be real. but he knows how all of these things work, and our strategists and advisors know how these things work too. So you'll meet one on one with somebody who knows your situation and knows what's going on very well and can help work with you from there. So yeah, so fill out a questionnaire after you click on that link. We will reach out to you usually within 1 or 2 business days after you send that in, and then we'll get you on the phone on an appointment with a strategist. Again, usually after that initial questionnaire is submitted, it's 5 business days tops, and you've already had an appointment with somebody, and you know what you need to do moving forward.
And one thing we like about Anderson guys, so you all know, is that, they're not going to strong arm you. The nice thing is they're
Hmm.
going to make suggestions for you that are reasonable and applicable to you and your situation. And honestly, not like anything you've probably ever had before. A lot of people go to their CPA they've had or their brother-in-law they've used for 20 years, and they say, "Oh well, you know what? That's not how Johnny does it." Well, exactly, because these guys do taxes, asset protection, and estate planning in one. It's a whole different ball game, and well worth your time. Very much. Thank you for this free consult, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everybody. And thank you, everybody else, as well as taking the time to join us. And so, yes, I want to emphasize as well that is a free initial strategy session, free consult there for you. Absolutely no obligation. We want you to work with us because you want to. We're not going to fine print you. We're happy to work with you if the situation is correct. And for most people, it is because we all have something we're looking forward to protecting. So, Kendall, did you see a couple of other questions that jumped out at you while you, if not, I'll keep looking here.
Yeah, no, you did pretty good. I think you covered a lot. A lot of the questions were, a trust. I think we always get this no matter what. I think you addressed it well, though. But just to clarify, a lot of times people think a trust, I have full asset protection with the trust, so I'm good to go. I got a trust, and there's just so much confusion about that. I got an asset protection trust or a trust. What's the point of an LLC? You covered it well, but still, we can find a lot of confusion around that.
Yep, absolutely. And so so in the strategy session, the strategist will go over with you everything that you will need, and not just now, but also in the future. They'll include things that you don't need necessarily right now, but that are coming up on the horizon as well for you that you'll want to consider. So they'll put all of that in there, and yes, it is all of those tools put together. The vast majority of situations will include 1 or 2 trusts and a couple of LLCs and maybe a corporation. We use corporations for tax planning for certain situations, and if used correctly, woo, they're a phenomenal tool for tax planning. And so it's a combination of all of those things together. I want to emphasize that it is a holistic view of what you're doing here. We're not just going to take a look at it from the asset protection angle, but we'll take a look at it from the asset protection, from the estate planning, from the tax planning, from cash flow, from business management, from liability on the outside, but also liability on the inside. Employees and business partners are just as big of a source of liability as are tenants and strangers. So we want to make sure you're protected from all angles. So it's a holistic overview. And then, yes, they will give you a cost estimate or investment estimate during that conversation. So they'll show you what you need, and they'll even give sort of layered recommendations like this is what you need right now, and this is how much your investment will be to get there. Here are a couple of other things that are important, but maybe are not as vital as this 1 or 2 things, right? Then here are other ancillary things that you'll need as you continue to grow. So they'll review all of that with you and put it together for you in that strategy session.
Yeah, I think they did good. Yeah, covered what the general ballpark costs are. They'll let you know. It obviously
Mm.
varies per person.
Yep, it varies a lot, and so again, I feel a little hesitant to do it because I don't want anybody to either go in thinking it's going to be one thing and then just have it be completely different. And I had another question come in here. Somebody asked about a living trust. Is that revocable or irrevocable? So a living trust is usually revocable, meaning you can change it. And we like that because it allows for adjustments and changes in your planning. Irrevocable or unchangeable trusts are not nearly as popular as they used to be. LLCs have kind of taken their place, and rightfully so. These unchangeable or irrevocable trusts have their sort of niche purposes, but they've fallen out of favor because of courtroom precedent and because of cost being prohibitive when you can also just get better protection from lawsuit with an LLC. Now, again, trusts are still very important. We talked about Wyoming statutory trust, right? They're different from an unchangeable, irrevocable trust. And they're used and we leverage them and wield them in very specific situations. And it's also true that not everybody's going to need them. And so we want to make sure we apply that correctly to your situation.
You're getting a lot of
Outstanding. Kendall, sorry,
accolades
go
here,
ahead.
Jeff. No, I'm saying you're getting a lot of accolades here. People are grateful for your webinar tonight, telling you good information, and a lot of people asking if they can meet directly with you. Can they ask that? I know you said that's a possibility, and
Hmm.
obviously we
Hmm.
have well over 100 people on the webinar tonight, guys.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And thank you
it
everybody for
also
coming.
comes
This is
down to
great.
time. That's the hard part. It comes down to Jeff's availability too. So please, I know for sure what Anderson tries to do is get you with the people who are best suited to you in your state and situation, right?
Yep, absolutely. So I saw somebody mention Massachusetts. We will not usually use a Massachusetts business trust, but do we have advisors who have worked particularly with Massachusetts clients and know the specific ins and outs of investing in that state? Yes, I can tell you right now. One of them, his name is Mike Tracy. He and I have worked together on a very particular Massachusetts issue. So we know all about that. And so if you're paired with Mike, he's just phenomenal. So he'd love to work with you there. As far as requesting a meeting with me, yes, you can request it. It's also true that, like Kendall said, availability is absolutely a thing. And I'm not offended by this, but most clients will choose somebody who has more availability quicker because our experts will tell you right up front, like, hey, you might meet with Shayna, who was a real estate broker herself and owns several properties. I won't tell you how many, but who was a real estate broker herself, owns several properties, and is very experienced in California because Shayna lives in California. And when people hear that, they say, "Oh man, and she's available, 2 business days from now." Like, yes, I'd love to meet with her, and she'll do a wonderful job. And so you'll see something like that where you'll be paired with somebody who has expertise specific to your situation, and they'll be available. We intentionally keep their calendars ready for situations like this. If you want to wait to meet with me, again, I'd love to chat with you. And it's also true that I wholeheartedly recommend our other advisors and strategists. And let me see here. I have somebody asked about taxes. Says Jeff doesn't do taxes. I don't file them, but yes, I am our lead tax attorney. So I do tax strategy all the time. Our tax team comes to me when they have a unique question and we work it out together. So yeah, I do taxes all the time. I don't actually file them. I'm not a CPA per se that sends in taxes and prepares them every year, but yes, I absolutely do tax planning and strategizing as well. I see a couple of other specific questions coming in here. Somebody asked, "Do you have an advisor in New Jersey?" Funny enough, yes, we do. We have a couple of them. So come on and you'll get to meet with them. In fact, we have an advisor who grew up in Jersey near the same town where oh shoot, what's his name? So Travis Kelsey and his brother Jason, where Travis and Jason grew up in Jersey, and they go back there and they work at the local bar one night a year, and he's been there a couple times and hung out with them. So yeah, absolutely, in Jersey we have advisors out there for sure.
So you're a Taylor Swift fan, huh? I see how it is.
My wife's a huge Swiftie. I'm a
I
closet
figured.
metalhead myself, but I know all about
There
it.
you go. This is figured.
All right, perfect. So I think I'm looking over here. I think we got most of them.
Yeah.
Somebody asked a really particular question. I won't get too far into the weeds, but they asked, "Does this work? Does a Wyoming statutory trust work the same way as a Delaware statutory trust?" The answer is no. They're actually two different things used for very different purposes. A DST, a Delaware statutory trust, is used primarily for 1031 exchanges. And so they're a little different in that regard, but a very interesting question. So you have some nuance and some understanding there. That's a great question there. All right, perfect. Kendall, do you see anything else that we ought to grab, or are we okay? I saw you sent the link.
Yeah,
Go
I put a
ahead.
link in the chat again. So, guys, obviously, the reason we work with Anderson and it's going on 20 plus years is because they do a great job. They know what they're talking about. They have a massive team that can absolutely help you in several different states with experience. Again, the coolest part is they're not just well versed in asset protection or tax or vice versa. It's estate planning, asset protection, taxes, all the above, which you kind of need when you're looking at an entire estate plan. You really do. So, Jeff, he's the guru, and we're super excited to have you on tonight. Jeff, really, really insightful. Thank you so much for presenting tonight.
Thank you for having us. We're really happy to be here, Kendall. And again, I will put in a plug for the summit, for the Protect Wealth Summit coming up. I believe it was March 9 through 11. Is that correct?
You got it. Yep.
Oh yeah, we're super excited for that. We'll be there too.
Yeah, I believe you'll be on that one, right?
I will be for part of it. Yes, absolutely. Myself and a good friend as well. We'll both be there.
We're looking forward to it. Again, everybody, thank you for being on tonight. Jeff, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise, and especially making yourself available for those consults. Again, we highly recommend those guys. Click that link, and we'll have a recording available tomorrow as well. Jeff, thanks again.
Kendall, thank you as well, and thank you everybody who joined. Let's go ahead. Kendall, do you have that link? Maybe we can post that one more time for
Yep,
that strategy session there.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I will,
Perfect. There it is.
yeah,
Looking good. So look forward to chatting with some of you soon. And thank you again, everybody, for joining tonight. And thank you, Kendall, as well.
thanks, Jeff. All right,
Jeff,
everybody,
thank
have a
you.
great
We'll
night.
see you in
Thanks
a
for being
couple
with us.
weeks.
Don, thank you as well.
Okay, buddy.
Have a good night, guys.
Take care.
Take care.